Hey everyone, in this super exciting video, I'm going to talk about my views on the LP Gallardo versus the pre-LP Gallardo. And I've owned both, so I have had significant experience driving both of them for the past few years. I'm going to give you my thoughts about several aspects of them in terms of my views about reliability, driving experience, cosmetics and appearance, and the various things you're going to want to watch out for when deciding between the two. Now, like I said, I have owned both of them. I currently own a LP Gallardo Superleggero, so the LP 570-4. I used to own an 06 Gallardo, so a pre-LP Gallardo. My current one is in white and I really like it. The last one was in black and I also really liked it. However, there are significant differences. And overall, I significantly prefer the LP, and I would not go back to a pre-LP unless it were at a super attractive price, because the LP Gallardo is significantly more enjoyable to drive. I significantly prefer how it drives and its reliability, and I kind of like the look a little bit more as well, although that is neither here nor there for me, really. Alright, if you have any thoughts about this, however, do drop those in the comments below, and otherwise, absolutely would be brilliant if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. So, I'll start off by giving you a bit of a background on the two cars I have. The car I'm currently in is an LP Gallardo Superleggero. I bought it approximately 4 to 5 months ago. I've lost track of when exactly I bought it, but I've bought it since then. I kind of daily drive it to the extent that I'm actually daily driving, which isn't really the case. I drive out to work maybe once a week, and that's pretty much it, to be totally honest. Of course, COVID means not really going out to the office, so really I don't have to drive it that much, although I really do enjoy when I do drive it. So that's basically the situation here. I bought this car from Perth, and then it came from Perth, which is the other side of the country, to Sydney. So that's a big trip. It was sitting there for a while, took a while to get here, but it wasn't that expensive to transport it. When I bought this car, it was in pretty much near perfect condition. It had been driven, so had around 40,000 kilometers on it. I think that's what, 20,000 miles or something. So had been driven, but was in good condition. I got a PPI done by Lamborghini in Perth. There were some things that had wear and tear, like brake pads, but like nothing major. And so far I haven't spent much on it, and I'll get to that in a second. The pre-LP Gallardo I bought from Queensland, so again a different state, but the PPI was not as well done. I should have gotten the PPI done at Lamborghini in Queensland, in Brisbane, but I didn't, so I feel like some things were missed. It didn't have a full service history, whereas my LP has a perfect Lamborghini service history, and that other pre-LP was an import. It was imported from Singapore, whereas my LP Gallardo that I'm currently in was delivered straight to Australia. So the pre-LP was probably a worse example than the LP. So to kind of put it this way, my experience is going to be a little bit skewed. I'm comparing one of the more pristine and perfect examples of an LP versus one of the not great examples of a pre-LP when I bought it. I've also learnt a lot between the two cars, and that also significantly influences things. So let's first start off with reliability, which is the first major thing that people are concerned about with any supercar. And to my mind, it's probably one of the first things you should think about when you're considering these cars. That over and above performance, reliability and cost is going to be easily as important as actual performance. So let's talk about reliability. Reliability for the LP Gallardo has been incredibly good. I've had it for about 5 months, so things can easily go wrong after this, but it has been incredibly good. The coils needed to be done after I got it. That was largely a function of it needing to come from the other side of the country and sitting there for a while. Furthermore, I've replaced the brake pads, and that's it. So overall, I've spent maybe $1,500 on wear and tear stuff. And I knew about the brake pads when I bought them, so this was factored into the price I paid. So that's easy. In terms of the clutch on LPs is significantly more reliable than on pre-LPs. Furthermore, the e-gear software is significantly better, so clutch wear is significantly less bad than on pre-LP Gallardos. I will probably still need to replace the clutch at some stage, but that is not imminent in any way. So reliability has been incredibly good in my experience. Note, however, that I bought one of the best examples on the market, and I bought one of the best examples because I didn't want to deal with any headaches, and I really like the Superleggero. So that then brings me on to what about the pre-LP Gallardo? How reliable or not is it? And in my experience, it's not brilliant. It's not the worst in the world, in that I've heard horror stories about other brands, but my experience was not positive. The experience was not positive because some things had kind of gone wrong. I bought it with a check engine light on, ostensibly because a sensor had failed. That was expensive. That cost me $4,000 to deal with. Then, in addition to this, other things had kind of miscellaneously gone wrong. So I had to spend some money when I got it because there were some issues in terms of like how clear the oil was. I'm not fully on top of all of them. I also had to remove a wrap from it, which is always a Pandora's box, in that I was lucky. The paint under the wrap was perfect, but that could have been much worse. So basically I had to remove the wrap. When I had that cost quite a bit of money because wraps and getting those removed is expensive because they kind of bake on in the engine area. And it just did some other stuff cosmetically as well, so a whole host of issues, a little bit expensive to begin with. Then, over time, a coolant hose had come loose. Now, the problem here is I took it to a mechanic that was not particularly good. It sat with the mechanic for about 5.5 months. It still wasn't really drivable at the end of that period, so I had to take it to another mechanic who seemed to fix up the original mechanic's issues, and that ended up fixing up the problems that I believe they seem to have caused. In any case, it took them 5.5 months and I still couldn't drive it out of there, is basically some story. Took it to the next mechanic, that was about $10,000 all up. Some of those issues, however, could have been due to the first mechanic, and certainly it still wasn't drivable after the first mechanic, so there were things that needed to be dealt with that had arisen during the first mechanic's issues. So overall, that's definitely an expensive endeavor there. So it has been quite expensive to own that pre-LP Gallardo. I don't know the exact numbers because I can't remember all of what it added up to, and I don't have the receipts all to hand, but essentially expensive and made worse by some of what had happened with one of the mechanics. So that's an issue that had arisen. So overall, I didn't particularly enjoy the ownership experience because for me, the reliability was not great. Now, I believe the owner has bought it in significantly better condition than I bought it in. I.e., when I sold it, it was much better than when I bought it, after I'd done all of the stuff I'd done. I also converted it to rear-wheel drive toward the end, and that made it much more pleasant to drive, but still, reliability is worse. This is not just an isolated experience. You hear anecdotally that the LP Gallardos are significantly more reliable all around. The engine is more reliable, they are less prone to the engine just spectacularly failing. They also have significantly better clutch wear, and that needs to be replaced significantly less frequently, and just everything seems to work better. It seems more reliable, nothing seems to break very much on things, and that seems to be anecdotally the case across the board. So overall, I'd give reliability to the LP Gallardo any day, and that appears to be not just my experience, although mine is somewhat skewed, but in general terms, the general experience, from what I can gather. The next issue is performance. So is performance noticeably better or worse in one of the two? Now, I find performance significantly better in the LP. Now, granted, I'm driving a Superleggero. It is naturally going to have better performance. The Superleggeros are like the top performance, well, not quite literally the top, but close to the top performance as far as these things go. Obviously, like the Squadra Corsa and the Super Trofeo Stradale are going to give you better performance, but still, this is close to the top in terms of performance. So there are some things, however, that you can directly compare that are not Superleggero specific. So let's focus first on the shifts and the transmission. The shifts and the transmission are significantly better for the LP. I say significantly better by a significant margin, and I can't overstate that. This is both when you are driving and also when you are going from a dead stop. With the pre-LP, it tends to shudder a little bit and judder a little bit when you're going from a dead stop at traffic lights. Now, maybe you can find a way around that, but I was never able to find a perfect solution. So it's just really annoying going from like a dead stop. By contrast, with the LP, you get none of that. It's not like dual clutch smooth, but it is smooth enough that it removes the annoyances of the pre-LP while still retaining the feel of this single-touch robotized transmission, which is kind of an enjoyable transmission to drive overall, at least in my opinion. So it kind of has the best of both worlds to my mind. Kind of like how the Aventadors do as well. Obviously the Aventador is a better car, but you get what I mean there. So it is also much better in terms of just the takeoff, but also the clutch overall, and the transmission overall, the transmission feel. In terms of handling, they're going to be very similar, to be totally honest. I converted my pre-LP to rear-wheel drive, which is pretty much a must for pre-LPs in my opinion. I'm currently driving an all-wheel drive, which all Superleggeras are. The all-wheel drive is quite good, but it has a much wider turning circle. It's kind of annoying. I prefer rear-wheel drive, to be honest, even though rear-wheel drive does sometimes lose traction. We also have the comfort and convenience things like hill hold. Hill hold is something the LPs have, but the pre-LPs don't. So that's kind of a no-brainer. It's kind of really useful in terms of performance to have hill hold, because it means you're not going to randomly fear running into a cyclist while reversing down a hill. Like, I hate when cyclists come up behind me in the pre-LP because I fear that I'd be reversing into them accidentally. And the LP does not have that nearly as much. So LP is significantly better in terms of that. So overall performance and drivability, I definitely give it to the LP Gallardo. And that's not even close. Easily to the LP. And that's not even because it's a Superleggera, but just because it is a better car overall in terms of the LP. I'd say the same if you've got an LP 560 or the LP 550-2, so the rear-wheel drive version. Whichever one you get, the LP is significantly better. Alright, so what about technology? Technology is basically the same between the two. There's really very little difference. The gauge cluster is slightly different with the LPs. It looks better, the screen's higher resolution. The stock standard infotainment system is pretty terrible in both of them. I have an aftermarket one in both. So, I mean, technology is so similar, it really does not make any difference. In the LP, I don't get heated seats. I don't really care. I'm in Sydney, it's warm enough. Heated seats make no difference. Don't care. Never use them in the pre-LP. Maybe in some environments you would, but yeah, not really any difference there. The next issue then is cosmetics. Which one do you like the look of? Personal preference there. I prefer the LP, but not like by a massive margin. It's not like one of those things where I'd be like, the pre-LP's ugly. I like the pre-LP. I also like the LP. And I would not modify the pre-LP because I think it looks perfectly fine. I don't see any issue with it. I wouldn't go out of my way to make it look like an LP. It looks really nice. The LP also looks nice. I think the Superleggera looks brilliant. I think all of the stuff they've done to add to it, in terms of the carbon fiber, in terms of the different front bumper, in terms of the wing, I think that all looks wonderful. So I think it is a very beautiful looking car. The Superleggera especially. But the pre-LP is also a beautiful looking car. The only thing I'd mention here is with pre-LPs, make sure that the headlights aren't foggy because that really ages the car. And the other thing that ages the car is probably just the headlights in general. The LP has like the LED stuff on it, which looks much more modern. So overall, the LP looks more modern, but that isn't really like by a huge margin. It's just by like a small amount, and I wouldn't really be saying that one is so much worse than the other that I'd care a lot about it, to be totally honest. So overall, we're looking at cosmetics being very much a personal taste thing, but I'd probably give it to the LP, but again, not by a huge margin. In terms of comfort and that type of thing, again, so similar, it doesn't make any real difference. I'm in the Superleggera. I really love the Superleggera seats, but again, that's a function of this specific car. You could get that in the LP as well. I don't think that's really a big deal. So overall, we're pretty much looking at the LP taking it really, in terms of performance, in terms of reliability, in terms of all of that type of thing. I give it to the LP Gallardo. So the overall question then is, would I go for an LP over a pre-LP? And the answer is definitely an LP, and I would save money and wait to get an LP over a pre-LP. The LP is more reliable, it's more fun to drive, it's just a better experience overall. It's basically painless, and you don't need to deal with any issues or headaches that often arise with these supercars. So I'd go with the LP any day over the pre-LP. Different minds will think differently on this. And if you have any thoughts about it, do drop those in the comments below. But otherwise, it would be brilliant if you liked the video and subscribe to the channel. And thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope this has not bored you to death and has been somewhat informative, or at least somewhat vaguely entertaining. And I hope to see you for future videos as well. Bye.